Have you ever heard the expression, something looks good from far, but it's far from good? This mid-century chest of drawers is the perfect example of that, because from standing, several feet back, it looks pretty good. But when you get up close, you start to see all of the imperfections and wear and tear on this piece. Now, this is not an exceptional or high-end piece. This is a fairly common mass-produced piece made by Vicart. It has 5 drawers, and each drawer needs a little bit of love on the inside and the outside. Having a look at the finish on the top and sides, this is a little bit beyond normal wear and tear, and without addressing some of these issues, the longevity of the piece could be compromised. So this is a piece that I would want to refinish. It still has the original sticker on the back. You can see this was made in 1968, and it is very typical of that sort of mediocre quality mid-century furniture. And that is, of course, pressed wood covered in beautiful walnut veneer. I thought this was going to be a quick and easy flip. That's why I picked it for this video. However, the drawers had something else in mind, and you'll see what I mean in a minute. Stay tuned. My name is Angie, and I refinish furniture. Sometimes I paint and sometimes I don't, but I always do what I can to save old pieces from the trash. Welcome to my workroom. So first things first, I want to welcome everybody to 2025 and my first flip of the year. Now, a question I get asked fairly often is how I choose my pieces to work on for these videos. And unlike some other furniture channels, I don't specifically go find a piece for a video. I have a storage room full of furniture that I bought way back in 2019 and 2020 when I had a furniture store, which is where the name Transcend Furniture Gallery comes from. But when 2020 happened, everything came to a grinding halt here in Nova Scotia, and all of that furniture that I had amassed to work on for my store kind of got put on hold. So what I've been doing over the last few years is pulling out pieces out of the storage room, and that's why you see a lot of the same things. You guys have seen me redo mid-century dressers before. Even though they all have elements that are the same, each piece does have some unique issues, and this piece is no exception. Someone has Mod Podged some craft paper into the bottom, and I know this is actually 12 by 12 cardstock for making cards, and I know this because I used to have this exact paper in my craft room. The problem is that the stuff can be really hard to take off. Scraping it off is not an option because with Mod Podge, you apply the Mod Podge to the drawer bottom, then you put your paper on, and then you apply the Mod Podge over top. So it becomes kind of sealed into the drawer. Heat doesn't work great. It can sometimes work great on normal adhesives, but this is a bit of a different beast. So I decided to try some stripper. It did work a bit, but I had to work at this drawer for almost an hour. I ended up taking the drawer apart. You can see I did a little bit of damage there, but when I put it all back together, it'll be fine. Because this isn't a drawer where the drawer bottom slides out easily, it makes removing this Mod Podge stuff so much harder. And I only took the drawer apart for this first one. I needed to kind of see what angles I needed to get at to get this paper off. Thankfully, with a little bit more patience, I was able to get it off in the rest of the drawers without having to disassemble and deal with all that crap. The key, it turns out, is to let the stripper sit on way longer than you would on, say, a finish. And because my stripper is usually pretty good, I'm used to being able to work really quickly, so I wasn't super patient with this, and I should have been. There's a lot of reasons people will put things in drawers. Sometimes it is to cover up staining. In fact, most of the time it's to cover up stains. Personally, I try not to put things that are not easily removable in drawers. I do occasionally use a drawer liner, but it is usually repositionable, which means that you can pretty easily peel it up. Once I had all the paper off, I just added a little bit more stripper to remove the original finish from the inside of the drawer, got it all sanded smooth, and then put the drawer back together. Now this, to some, might look like solid wood. The handle is, and the handle is just tacked on here. But this drawer face is actually pressed wood like the rest of it. It just happens to have walnut veneer on the outside. It's got walnut veneer edge banding around all of the narrow edges. And on the flip side is birch veneer, which is what you see on the inside of the drawer. Every drawer pretty much had some part of the joinery that needed some gluing. And I'm just using a glue syringe to get in this little narrow gap here where the sliding dovetail slides down into that drawer face. And because the drawer face is pressed wood in between those two layers of veneer, it just doesn't hold up as well as if the drawer faces were solid wood or even plywood with that same sliding dovetail. So a little bit of wood glue is going to stiffen that up. So in addition to the handles being made of a different wood, so is the leg assembly, but as you can see, it all looks the same color, and manufacturers are able to do this through use of glazes and toners usually. And a toner is simply a tinted lacquer. Sometimes they'll use a little bit of stain, like a dye stain, and then a toner on top. I'm going to be using a stain to redo these legs and the handles later on. The screws and washers and nuts for this leg assembly were a bit rusty, so I just tossed them into a rust bath of some Evaporust, and I'll pull those out in a few hours and they'll be nice and clean. I'm not going to be taking the entire leg assembly apart, but this is usually the point where I'll go and tighten up any loose screws, and a lot of times you will find a couple that are a little bit loose. Again, no super fancy joinery here. This is simply pocket holes and screws, maybe a little bit of wood glue. So you got to be careful with leg assemblies because sometimes on the front here you'll have a panel of whatever veneer is on the rest of the piece, and in this case it'll be walnut. But here there's not. All of the color you see on the legs and on the leg assembly, it's all done with toners. So as I sand it off, you're going to see a very, very pale wood. Most of the time they use something like ash or birch, sometimes beech, even poplar I've seen. And this is all just to keep costs down. So if you remember in the beginning, all of the drawers were super loose on the tracks, and it's because of these plastic pieces at the back of the drawer. Every single one of them was broken. You can pick these up really cheap on Amazon. And speaking of picking up supplies, don't forget that in all of my videos, if you go down to the description box below, I have links for the majority of the tools and products I use just to make things easy for you guys. The drawer bottoms, because of the way these are built, aren't sitting in very well. There are some staples here that I'm going to hammer back in. But if I'd left it like this, as soon as you put any weight in the drawer, those would kind of pull loose again. So you can see just off to the right there, my Makita crown stapler. I'm going to add some fresh staples just to help hold that tight. Okay, so these two top drawers are a bit more complex. It's the same thing with the other drawers in that the handles and decorative appliques here, they're not screwed on, they're actually glued and pinned in. So I don't want to take these apart if I don't have to. So in this case, I'm going to be using a stripper to remove the old finish rather than a scraper. This is going to work out a lot better on these two drawers specifically. Because I opted not to remove the trim, I have to do everything by hand. Now these little decorative pieces on the front here, which also act as the handle on these two drawers, these aren't solid wood either. They're that same light wood sandwiched by veneer. So on the top, the part that we see is walnut veneer. And then the underside, you can actually see the little line there as it attaches to the drawer. There's another type of substrate veneer there as well. So what this means is when I go to refinish these top two drawers, I have to stain that light wood, just like I did with the handles on the other drawers. There's a few little chips here that I'm just using some Timbermate wood filler to fill. I will let that dry and then give it a light sanding again before I move forward with the staining and top coats. So I'm using some water-based stain in the color Walnut here on the framing on the inside. If you remember from the original picture, they were toned very dark. I am staining them not quite as dark, but because this is pale wood, it would just look kind of strange to have the contrast. Now, sometimes I like the contrast. You'll see me leave a leg assembly like this natural and have the dark walnut top, but in this case, that's not what I want to do. I want to kind of recreate this as close to original as possible. So now that the leg assembly is completely sanded down and ready for stain, I'm going to go ahead and use that same water-based stain. Why am I using water-based stain as opposed to oil-based? It really allows you to manipulate it, and you can have it as opaque or as translucent as you like. And you control this by applying it and then wiping off as much as you want to. There are some situations where I want this to be super opaque. Here, I'm just kind of testing it. I'm going to wipe it back a little bit. And if there's too much coming off, I'll just take my brush, add a little bit more until I get it roughly where I want. Now, what's interesting about this stain is it looks very dull and chalky until you put the top coat on, and that's when you get that rich color come through. So what you see as the stain is drying is not what it's going to look like when you put your top coat on. I am going to be using some toner on the cabinet as well as the legs so that they kind of blend together well. But I still want to be able to see a bit of that wood grain, so I don't want this to be too opaque. So up on top, my finish is lacquer based, so I'm going to be using a respirator, of course. And it's going to consist of 3 separate products. So this first product I'm using here is called Easy Vinyl Sealer. This is a product made by Mohawk. This acts a bit like a primer does under paint, except in this case it will be under lacquer. It's going to seal that wood in and allow any subsequent toners and stuff to kind of be isolated. And these handles make spraying so much easier, especially if you've got a lot of spraying to do. So I ended up doing 3 coats of the vinyl sealer. Then I went in and touched up a few areas that needed it with the Mohawk graining markers. And you'll see me do that in a little bit. I often get asked why I continue to use these spray cans when I could have a full spray setup, and it's because I don't really have a spot to do this permanently. I also don't use lacquer that much anymore. It's honestly not my favorite thing to do, but some cases call for it, such as here. So for the little bit that I do, these cans work fine. So like I said, I did 3 coats of the vinyl sealer with a very light sanding in between just to knock off any dust nibs. And then here I'm using those graining markers from Mohawk to kind of camouflage this little weird depression area. It wasn't a chip big enough to put some wood filler in, so these markers are great for that. Once those little touch-ups were done, I did 1 more coat of the vinyl sealer, and here I'm using the toner. Now, toner is just a tinted lacquer. This color is called Perfect Brown, and I'm not trying to make this completely opaque, obviously. I love the variation in the grain. You guys see me with Odes oil, the crazy variations, I love that. But on a piece like this, when I'm trying to bring it back closer to the original, maybe not identical, I just need these variations between the heartwood and the sapwood to kind of calm down a little bit. I'm basically trying to mute them without taking away the beautiful wood grain. Next, it was on to the drawers. Now again, I'm using that water-based stain on the handle. Here on the edge banding in the front, I have walnut, so I'm not going to be staining that. So I'm going to tape it off. I'm only going to be applying the stain to the handle, but then I will be applying the vinyl sealer and the toner to all of it together to help it kind of mesh. For the drawer boxes themselves, I don't have footage of it, but I did use some Howard feed-in wax just to kind of freshen up the drawers a bit. And there's a little bit of a groove just behind the handle, so I wanted to tape off that top edge banding so that I could get into the groove but not stain the edge banding itself. Just like I did on the legs, I'm wiping the handle back a little bit until I can see some of the wood grain, but it's not too light. And then I'll pull the tape off and repeat what I did on the outer cabinet to the drawers. Now these top 2 drawers, just like it was when it came to taking the finish off, it's a bit complicated getting the finish on. So I'm using some tape here to mask off the actual walnut veneer, so that I'll be able to stain the lighter color wood. Once that's stained, I'll pull off the tape and repeat the process again with the vinyl sealer, toner, and lacquer. Aside from typical tools like hammers, glue, that sort of thing, I used circa 1850s stripper. I used Timbermate wood filler in the color Walnut. This is the Saman water-based stain in the color Walnut. Mohawk Easy Vinyl Sealer, the Ultra Classic Toner in Perfect Brown, and the pre-catalyzed Satin Lacquer, as well as their brush tip markers. Now the colors I used for Walnut, and they seem to be pretty universal, Light Oak, Dark Perfect Brown, Burnt Sienna, and Honey Spice seem to work really well on that reddish toned mid-century walnut. And again, the Howard feed and wax inside of the drawers only. And this is a must-have if you're using lacquers, any type of solvents, oil-based stains. Get yourself a respirator. All right, so if we rewind a bit and have a look at what I started with, again, this is one of those pieces that from several feet away looks pretty good until you get up close and see all of the finish damage and gouges and scratches, repairs that have to be made, chips. I'm really happy with how the first project of 2025 came out despite the hurdles. As always, thank you so much for watching, enjoy the reveal, and I will see you next time.